A short while ago, I had the chance to visit the African country of Burundi. This is a country that has at several points been named the most food insecure country in the world. 90% of Burundians rely on agriculture for their food and income, but climate change has disrupted their ability to do this for their own survival. While I was there, I met plenty of people who told me that the crops, the practices, the rhythms that they had relied on for generations could no longer be trusted. What this looked like was worsening food insecurity, persistent droughts, inconsistent rainfall, and shorter harvest seasons every year. Up close, this looked like a man named Enos, who I met in the area of Mutsundozi. He told me of all the times he and his family would have to skip meals. He told me about having to look at his children, telling them he didn't know where their dinner would come from, that it might have to be another day that they let go by without eating. As a dad myself, I realized this was an experience that no parent, whether you are in Burundi, California, or anywhere else in this world, wants to have. How does a story like his make you feel? I am a climate storyteller. For years, I've been telling stories from the front lines of climate change, and this work has taken me to some of the most climate-vulnerable places on Earth. Places like Haiti, Tanzania, Bangladesh, and other similar settings. When people hear that this is what I do, they often express their own climate anxieties and then their own disappointment that there's still so much denial of the threat. However, I don't believe that denial is our biggest obstacle for meaningful action. In fact, the Yale Center for Climate Communication has found that the amount of people in the United States who are dismissive of climate change as a threat is below 10% of the US population. That's it. That's not a high enough number to impede action. And yet, we're still not acting with the urgency that we need. So what does get in our way? I believe that it's distance and despair. See, we're often presented with the climate crisis through this lens of global trends and macro-level statistics, and while these things are very helpful in the right context, when they're our primary lens of engagement, they create this layer of separation between ourselves and those who are the most affected by the crisis. This numbs our emotional connection. It deflates our motivation to act, and what we're left with is a flattened image, one that's only informed by the most disturbing headlines and reports, things that, while true, often lack the depth to show us where we can go from here. And what do we do next? You see, we can't meaningfully develop and implement solutions if we don't have proximity to the ones most affected by a problem. Until we've heard their stories and engaged their perspectives, whatever we develop will lack that touch of human empathy that's necessary for just solutions and for lasting solutions. But how do we do this? Especially when the areas hardest hit by climate change are rural and remote settings, typically in lower and middle-income countries. Storytelling. I believe that storytelling can be our bridge. It's one of our most fundamental behaviors as humans. We use stories and narratives to make sense of the world around us, often without even thinking about it. It's that innate. I'm sure you can think of a time where a story, perhaps it was a book or a film, helped you make sense of something you were experiencing in life. Well, I believe that stories can have a similar effect on us collectively as we confront this great threat that is climate change. Going back to our story of Enos in Burundi, at the time he and his family were missing all these meals, their top-of-mind concern wasn't necessarily their ecosystem, and it certainly wasn't the broader concept of climate change. It was the simple struggle to get food on the table. And all these things were connected, of course, but in Burundi it was very common to feel pulled, having to choose between one or the other. In fact, a visual example that I saw constantly were sacks of charcoal that I saw being sold by the side of the road almost everywhere I went. You see, charcoal can be sold for quick cash, and so what a lot of farmers would do was cut down the trees on their area, bake them into charcoal bricks, and then sell them. Because this could answer the question, what are we going to eat tonight? Unfortunately, it would reinvite that question in harsher and harsher ways for years to come. See, this is one of the leading drivers of deforestation in Burundi and countries with other similar settings. Without the support of trees, soil erosion intensifies. Damaged soil can't support adequate crop growth, and so we see food insecurity get worse over time. The loss of trees also takes away a vital carbon sink, and so you could see how this contributes to the broader cycle of climate change. Now, most Burundians were aware of the damage that this did to their land. In fact, I'd say they knew this better than anyone else because they were the ones experiencing it firsthand. But most felt trapped with no other options. This was true for a man I met by the name of Antoine, and as we spoke, he was actively burning charcoal in his kiln. He told me that he would gladly welcome another source of income, but what he was doing was what he believed to be the only opportunity he had to feed his family. This was a cycle where desperation led to degradation, which then caused further desperation. However, like most cycles, it could work in reverse. This is what happened to Enos. Enos joined many of his neighbors to form a Plant with Purpose group. This is a platform I've seen set up in many of the places I've worked. Here, members had the chance to exchange knowledge and skills in things like regenerative agriculture or reforestation, learning from each other in a peer-to-peer-like setting. This also gave them the opportunity to save their money together, and these savings would be used to offer members of the group loans that could be invested in more sustainable practices and sources of income. It simultaneously addressed economic and environmental needs, sending that cycle into reverse. For Enos, this changed everything. At first, it was his techniques and his practices on his farm, but then it became about his whole relationship with his land and his relationship with his community. It then changed the way he saw himself and the quality of life he was able to provide for his family. He told me with enthusiasm that it had been a very long time since they had had to skip a meal. They now ate 3 meals a day, consisting of food they had mostly grown on their own garden. He told me this as we were standing looking at the lush cover of trees around his land, and it occurred to me that this was more than just 3 meals a day. This was 3 meals a day for a family of 6 in one of the most hunger-challenged countries on Earth. I don't think I would feel as urgently concerned about the climate crisis if I didn't have proximity to people like Enos through the lens of storytelling. At the same time, I know that without that proximity, without those stories, I would not feel anywhere near as hopeful. Wherever I've seen a purpose group, I've seen tree cover replenished, I've seen soil health improve, and I've seen poverty cut as low as half. In Thailand, I've seen villages establish fire breaks to prevent wildfires from attacking their forests. In Haiti, I've seen communities establish erosion barriers, anticipating intense hurricane seasons every year and doing what they can to prevent runoff. And in Tanzania, I've met mothers who work to protect the slopes of Mount Kilimanjaro like their lives depend on it. Because if you think about it, they kind of do. And if these people in these places, which are some of the most climate-vulnerable places on Earth, have not given up, then those of us with more privilege and more resources have no excuse. Their stories hold us accountable. They hold those in power accountable. They show us that something can still be done and must be done, and that giving up is not an acceptable policy. A meaningful story well told drives action. A story focused on problem solving can make solutions visible. It can recenter voices that have been marginalized, but that represent the most affected populations. It can turn the act of trying to respond to a crisis into a practice of human empathy and compassion. And if our biggest obstacles have been distance and despair, then storytelling can move us past that, towards action and towards solutions. Thank you.